Mr. Chairman. Today, the majority once again prioritizes right-wing culture wars over the American people by bringing misguided legislation that would prevent the federal government from issuing regulations needed to implement congressional legislation to protect and defend our nation and the American people in the modern world. My colleagues are using bills as scare tactics to try and convince people that the federal rulemaking process is something to fear, while failing to acknowledge that federal regulations are an essential part of ensuring that Americans have things like clean air to breathe and water to drink, safe food to eat, safe airplanes to fly on. You can see examples of successful rulemaking all the time across the country. Before the Clean Water Act, the Delaware River, which runs alongside my district, was so polluted that it would strip the paint off passing ships. These days, you can safely kayak on the river thanks to regulations developed by agencies to carry out our laws. I'll also point out we're not talking about good faith efforts to provide checks on the regulatory process. My colleagues are ignoring the fact that Congress already has multiple tools to shape agency rulemaking, starting with the legislation we pass and moving all the way through repealing regulations that they don't like. And they've employed these measures many times so far this Congress. But H.R. 277, the REINS Act, which is the centerpiece of today's rule, does nothing but bring government operations to a grinding halt. And that seems to be exactly the point. There's also a possibility that the bill is unconstitutional because it creates a mechanism in which one house of Congress can effectively veto an agency's rule by simply not acting on it within a 70-day legislative time frame. This makes it indistinguishable from the one-house legislative veto that the Supreme Court held to be unconstitutional in Immigration and Naturalization Service versus Chadha. The unfortunate truth is Congress struggles every day to meet the most pressing needs of the American people. There are not enough hours in the day, year, or two-year congressional term for us to weigh in on all the regulations needed to implement the laws that we passed, and they are much better left to experts in most cases. Under this policy, crucial regulations would be left to languish, unacted upon, and as a result, Americans would be less safe. The next bill, H.R. 288, the Separation of Powers Restoration Act, is another misguided approach to the issues facing federal regulations and rulemaking. It eliminates a decades-long ruling precedent for judicial review of agency decisions in a way that increases the risk of judicial activism, slows the rulemaking process, and skews that rulemaking process towards more powerful litigants. It's clear that all the talk on the other side of the aisle about restoring power to Congress is empty words. They have this power, they just have chosen not to exercise it. Because this bill would actually incentivize unelected judges, not Congress, to make and enact policy from the bench, it is equally as misguided as the REINS rule. And it would make the rulemaking process even more time-consuming and costly, leading to delays in finalizing critical and even life-saving regulations. So with all of the issues concerning the American people, gun violence, opioid and fentanyl abuse, unaffordable health care, child care, the challenges of China and AI, in a 21st century economy, these are the bills that our colleagues are choosing to bring up. H.R. 1615, the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act, and H.R. 1640, the Save Our Stoves Act. These two bills work against requirements to ensure that newly manufactured gas stoves are healthy, safe, and energy efficient. H.R. 1615 threatens the government's ability to identify and regulate unsafe gas stoves, including those with design defects that could cause injury or death to American consumers. Had this bill been in effect last year, it would have prevented the Consumer Protection Safety Commission from issuing a recall on the type of gas stove that put people at serious risk of illness or death from carbon monoxide poisoning. People went to the hospital because this stove was defective. H.R. 1640 nullifies new, congressionally mandated energy efficiency standards for gas stoves that would save consumers $1.7 billion in energy bills and cut down on emissions that are particularly dangerous to children's health. The Department of Energy estimates that nearly half of the gas stove market already meets the proposed standard and would not be impacted, and the remainder have years in which to comply. contrary to the rhetoric out there, the government is not coming for anybody's gas stoves. It's a pervasive falsehood that's been repeated for months to stoke grievances without any truth to back up these claims, and now it's being used to press this legislation in Congress. It's abundantly clear that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't want our government to work better. They'd rather decimate a regulatory process that improves the lives of Americans every single day, and use fossil fuel industry talking points to block common sense rules like the one that would lower energy bills for our constituents and protect children from harmful indoor pollution that puts their health at risk. They want to promote a dangerous vision of America that includes an FDA that can't issue new drug regulations, an EPA that can't keep drinking water clean, a VA that is unable to effectively provide services to our veterans, and a Department of Transportation that is not going to be able to effectively enforce safety standards for cars, trains, or airplanes. I think that we as the federal government need to take more responsibility for the health, safety, and welfare of our districts and our constituents than to throw it all under a bus with these rules. I yield back.
Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record.